Hello, everybody. I'm Valora Washington, CEO of the CAYL Institute. We are so glad that you are here today, and we really thank you for joining our webinar today. Every first Thursday of the month at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Time, we bring you this webinar series to offer you timely and relevant information about early childhood educators and the early childhood education field. So we are so thrilled that you have joined us today. For your information, this session is being recorded. Closed captioning is available. And at the end of this webinar, we will be having a link where you can click that link and join in conversation with our panelists if you would like to do so. And we encourage you throughout the webinar, please write in the chat and tell us what you think about today's topic, which is compensation justice. We're delighted because 2024 marks the 20th anniversary of the CAYL Institute, and we are so grateful for your support. We especially want to shout out the Schott Foundation, who was our initial sponsor. We've been working with them over the years to train the next generation of early childhood leaders for 20 years. And as part of our celebration, the Schott Foundation is sponsoring this webinar series. And you too can be a supporter of the CAYL Institute. So we really encourage each and every one of you, if you're able to please donate $20 to celebrate our 20 years of service to the early childhood education community. Any amount of your gift is welcome and much appreciated. And we ask for your support so that you can join with us as we shine a light on the need of early childhood educators and try to take a giant leap forward in our work. In all of the work we've been doing, we've been using the imagery of Sankofa. We've been using that imagery this year as we've been talking about our individual and collective courage. This reminds us, like this Sankofa bird, to look back but to keep moving forward. And as we do this, we understand that a foundational thing that we constantly see when we look back and move forward is this issue of compensation. As early childhood education tries to attract a new workforce and support the ongoing workforce, the elephant in the room is always the issue of compensation. We're facing high turnover in our field, and sometimes low job satisfaction, and just compensation is a major issue for us. Now, you know, there have been very many compensation approaches that have been tried in our field over the years. In today's episode, our panelists are going to share their experiences with making change for compensation justice. We're going to hear strategies that work. We're going to hear how these strategies have changed over time. And we're going to talk about compensation justice. So we think back to our webinar last month. We were talking about how we tell our story. How do we tell the story of compensation and justice? And when you look back, you see that there's many ways that we try to tell our story over the years. At one point, we frequently talked about compensation justice as we compared early childhood education salaries with those of other workers like janitors and trash collectors. Those of you who've been around a long time will remember charts like this, where we used to compare ourselves to these kinds of fields to help people understand compensation and justice. But as time moved on and in more recent times, we start really changing that narrative and thinking about communicating our story by referencing early childhood educator salaries compared to other educators in public schools and in other kind of contexts. So you would begin to see charts like this, which is talking about our salaries compared to, say, kindergarten teachers or elementary school teachers. That became a very popular way that we began to try to tell our story about compensation and justice. But in more recent years, we've changed the narrative a little bit. And as we thought about new framing ways of talking about compensation and justice, we now talk about compensation often from an equity lens. We look at compensation through perspectives of gender, race, nativity. So you'll more often today see charts like this, which are comparing salaries by male and female, by different racial groups and so forth. This is a more common, typical way today that we think about compensation justice. So we know, however we tell our story, the truth still remains that there is compensation injustice. We've tried many ways of communicating this. Compensation still remains unacceptably low. So in these past few months, we've talked about how we must have the courage to fund our field, to tell our story. And today combines both of those ideas as we focus on the issue of compensation. So today we are going to have two very well-informed people to give us their insights about the compensation issue and to talk about this important concern. What I'd love for you to do is write in the chat and tell us your questions and thoughts about compensation justice issues. And be sure to join us at the end of this webinar by clicking on the link so that you can interact personally with our two guests today. Write in the chat, what are your thoughts about compensation justice? What's going to help us to achieve more justice in this area? And while you're writing in the chat, it is my delight and pleasure to introduce you to today's panel. Dr. Jamilah Jor'dan served as the executive director of the Illinois Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development. She was president of the Partnership for Quality Child Care, which was a $16 million public-private partnership. She's the past president of the board of NAEYC. She also served as the interim dean of the College of Education at Chicago State University. And we're delighted because Harriet Dichter has joined us. She's worked in very many states on this compensation issue. She has a well-earned reputation as a thoughtful and effective leader who moves teams and organizations from concept to sustainable implementation. She's done this in her current role as a consultant, but she's also done it as well in her former leadership roles in public policy, advocacy, foundation work, and working in nonprofit sectors. And she's worked at the local, state, and federal governments. She's a graduate of Yale University and the University of Pennsylvania Law School. The CAYL Institute has been thinking about compensation justice for a long time, and we hope our resources will be helpful for you. Please write in the chat and tell us what you're thinking about compensation justice. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We're going to start with Harriet Dichter to share with us her thoughts and insights about this issue. Harriet, please join us. So excited that you can join us and share your insights and wisdom that you've gained from working in so many states on this important issue. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today.
Thank you so much. It is really such a pleasure and honor to be here with everyone. And I was really excited to be asked by Valora to address this topic because I think this is the number one issue for people who are part of the childcare workforce and are really such a singular part of our early childhood community. I also really am excited because I feel that we are actually having some breakthrough moments that I want to talk about where we are starting to have states start to take on more systematic approaches to try to address workforce compensation. And so I want to start by sharing with everyone that traditionally compensation was most meaningfully addressed by our efforts to grow pre-K. And we did that essentially by trying to have pre-K include childcare and Head Start and try to at least have a more even footing with public school teachers in pre-K. But I think as people on this call will appreciate, we do not have a universal pre-K system yet in this country. And we do not even have every single state truly having mixed delivery and having those opportunities for our childcare workforce to be part of pre-K. And of course, as you all know, by just the naming of pre-K, it's not including our services for infants and toddlers. So while the pre-K work is certainly important in terms of one way to try to look at compensation, it is pretty incomplete. Now, within childcare itself, we've had a traditional way to address compensation, which has been to basically take funding and add bonuses or have add-on amounts in some ways to have supplements for providers. Those traditional ways of doing this work have often not been part of the regular paycheck, and they typically have not moved a workforce very far in their quest to get professional compensation. In addition, these types of approaches generally have been had real limitations on who could participate. Maybe they were only for providers who were in the publicly funded child care assistance program. They might be time limited. They might not be integrated into the regular paycheck. And of course, what I might say, thinking about some of these past efforts we've had, is they have operated a bit from a scarcity mindset because they didn't really guarantee sustainability. And for the workers, they could not be counted on from year to year. Now, most of those efforts basically have therefore not focused on what I think we would like to think about as a North Star for compensation, getting the early childhood workforce paid as professionals, in other words, the justice angle that Valora has shared with us that frames today's topic, but really they were to provide a modest boost. Those boosts, of course, are very welcome by members of the workforce who've received them, and they have always had positive testimony on that. But as I've said, they haven't really focused on the justice part of compensation, which is, in fact, today's real conversation and a real focus. So, what I think we're seeing now is approaches to compensation justice that are more systemic. They are set up to be so much more sustaining and set up to focus on getting the workforce out of the truly low wage bind that we're in today. So, I want to highlight with my time what I see as two different approaches going on, both of which I think are really exciting, worth all of us knowing about and understanding there are, as always, different ways to solve the problems we have. There's not usually a solution to the big challenges that we have, but often different kinds of solutions that are going to be appropriate in different contexts. So, what these two approaches do share, they do share a lot. Each approach is using a systems focus on problem solving so that we get the end result we're looking for, compensation justice. They also share a view that the role of the public sector is critical, and the public sector plays an equalizing role to address compensation. They're also focused on scale and having their approaches be big enough so that the tent is big. Everyone you mean to be included can actually derive the benefit and have an asset for them on compensation. These approaches are also trying to get out of that scarcity mindset that I mentioned that we often have in early childhood education and care and into a place to say we've got enough resources, we can significantly improve the pay of the workforce. While each of the approaches I'm going to talk about does have room for more growth, it's trying to think about this. If I'm thinking of a big bucket of water, these approaches start with the idea our starting point ought to be three-quarters full, not an eighth of a eighth full, basically, or a quarter full. So for today's discussion, since hopefully by now you're like, what is she talking about? What are these two approaches? I'm going to call the first approach employment-based and the other family-based. And I'm going to start with employment-based approach. In this first approach, the focus is on everyone who works in a child care program, and the means or mechanism that is used goes directly to the program for the benefit of all of the covered workforce. It is thinking about the workforce as a whole. Workforce compensation strategies are for everyone. They are not restricted to programs that serve low-income children, programs that are part of the quality improvement system. Okay, so they are really around the totality or the whole of the workforce. To help understand this approach, let's think for a moment about the ARPA money that was given out as provider stabilization during COVID. Provider stabilization went to all providers as all providers needed stabilization. Borrowing from this thinking, we see public sector action to focus on all of the covered workforce within this program to address compensation. Program I want to mention explicitly to help make this case very concrete for everyone is the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia set up a program. Its name is the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund. In this program, every single teacher of a young child, whether she is working in a child care center or a family child care home, has her pay improved. There are a few things I really want to note about this approach that I hope you can remember. One, the improved pay is really substantial. In this program, basically, in the first year of operation, on average, the child care teachers had wage improvement of $14,000 a year annually. Can I say that one more time? In the first year of operation, on average, the teachers had wage improvement of 14,000 annually. This program is for any childcare facility in the jurisdiction that is licensed, home-based or center-based. These are treated equitably within the District of Columbia approach. Within the programs, they must agree to pay the eligible educators specific salaries. In other words, there is a salary scale and a view of what the earnings need to be that provide for compensation justice. Another key point about this program approach is that it's leveraging existing systems, for example, licensing records, to ensure that all the eligible staff are captured and included in the program. Now, after the initial startup of this particular program, the program does business with the employer. So the employer of record for the member of the child care workforce basically in turn takes the resources and in turn agrees to and makes the necessary total salary payments to the educator. So this is pretty reliable in terms of integrating into the paycheck. I do want to say here, this program is already making a difference, and I want to share with you a little bit of what some of the educators have had to say about it. Black and Latinx educators involved in this program have been significantly more likely, actually, than the white educators involved, to say that the fund has helped them to pay for housing, utility bills, debts, emergency costs, and childcare materials. Black and Latinx educators participating have also reported that the fund has helped alleviate financial stress so that they could focus on providing quality childcare. Latinx educators in particular have said that the fund has actually fundamentally increased their intentions to stay in early education. And for 69% of those who participated in this, the fund has allowed them to save for the future, sometimes for the very first time in their lives. Early educators see the Pay Equity Fund as progress towards fair and equitable pay. Of the early educators that were surveyed, about 70% have agreed, somewhat or a lot, with these kinds of statements. Because of the Pay Equity Fund payments, I feel like I'm being paid what I should be for the credentials required for my job. And because of the Pay Equity Fund payments, I can better focus on the needs and development of the children I work with. Surveys were also done around the educators and their salary. These early educators reported median annual wages of $35,000 in 2023. That is equivalent to about $19 an hour before Pay Equity Fund payments started. In that same year, annual payments, as I mentioned, of $14,000 and $10,000 for full-time lead and assistant teachers represented wage increases 37 and 31% respectively. Now, researchers have also noted that there were three big reasons that this fund was set up. First was to lift early educators' salaries to the level of public school teachers, to address longstanding issues of gender discrimination, systemic racism, and occupational segregation that we see in our childcare field. Secondly, to improve staff recruitment and retention, and third, to improve quality. The people who have worked on this initiative have already seen early results, and I've cited a few of them for you in all three of these goals being met. Before I move on to our next approach that I want to share with you, I want to note a few things for everyone here. First, the people who worked on this particular initiative were extremely well disciplined and organized, and they connected this important work on early education compensation to decades of policy innovation in their community. Second, I do want to share that even with very successful early implementation, a bit into the implementation, the DC government did propose significant reductions in the approach. It has taken a lot of concerted ongoing activity to maintain this program, which is only to say for all of us that we have to stay vigilant when we have our wins. All right. But this is a really important piece here. Now, I also do want to say that within this foundational systemic report, there were choices that were made. The focus here is on teachers in rooms with children, home-based childcare, center-based childcare. They are not supporting, for example, center directors or other personnel at this point. So that is important. We're going to hear a little bit more in a few minutes when Jamilah takes over to talk about another effort that I will consider to be in this same scheme that is going on in Illinois today. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the second approach, which I'm calling family based. This approach is found in pioneering states such as Vermont and New Mexico. A fundamental part of this approach is to think about how our families access childcare and how that can be made more universal, and having the state then make changes in compensation by making big improvements in what they are paying to many more families who are qualifying for childcare assistance. So, in this approach, states are taking two distinct actions that get at childcare compensation. First is to raise the income level very significantly about who qualifies for childcare assistance or childcare subsidy. In Vermont, this means that families who earn at the federal poverty level of 575% can qualify. And in New Mexico, which is the other state to highlight here, the level is set in a way that estimates 80% of all children in the state will qualify for participation in childcare assistance. That is 425% of the federal poverty line for them. The second part of the strategy is to then say if we're paying for many more children, we have to pay much more robustly in terms of the state rate setting. And so the idea here is that by increasing funding, that will increase compensation for staff, improving their pay, their recruitment, and their retention. So these are very linked parts of the strategies. Elevating up who can get into the child care assistance program, dramatically increasing what is being paid basically for that. And without those two things going together, this can't be a successful compensation approach because you have to cover almost all the children in someone's program in order to get the dollars in to be able to pay for the staff. So I want to really emphasize the two aspects of this family-based approach being able to go together. So I want to say a little bit for you here, basically about Vermont. So Vermont has increased their eligibility from 350% of the federal poverty level to 575%, as I mentioned. The law also provides for higher reimbursement rates for childcare businesses, again, with the expectation that the money will go to pay for hard to find staff for them. Vermont did this first by starting to give everyone their top rate that they offer to anyone in their quality improvement system. And then they increased that more by 1/3 for all of the providers that were participating. So, what do we know from early implementation in Vermont? Good news. Vermont has already seen an increase in the supply and number of childcare providers in their community. In fact, in the first 3 months after their law was passed, more childcare centers and home based businesses opened than closed. That was the first time that happened since they started tracking this data in 2012. Now, in Vermont, again, the focus is access for families, quality for the children served, and affordability. And you can see all that in the way that they shape the program. I don't want to conclude. I am getting ready to conclude without saying a little bit about New Mexico, because New Mexico is increasing family access to child care assistance. They're raising who can get into the program. And they, in fact, are one of the first states in the nation to use cost modeling approach as they are seeking to radically improve what they're paying out through their child care assistance program to their providers. Those are all wonderful things. New Mexico isn't taking any chances though, and they want to continue to be really focused. And so they are also basically adding additional programming on increasing compensation. And the newest of those is actually focused on infant toddler pay parity. This is for infant toddler teachers who work in centers and in family childcare homes, and also for directors in centers that are serving infants and toddlers. They have created a whole schedule of the parity rate that is focused on the educator's degree and experience, and they are paying the difference between the salary that the program is offering the educator and what they think an appropriately paritable pay compensation would be. New Mexico does have similar programs for those in Head Start and pre-K that's offered in a community setting. So as I said, New Mexico is sort of saying we're going to get more people into subsidy, we're going to pay them better, and we are going to make sure that we have specialized programs where that still isn't working to make up the difference so that we get these groups of educators paid what is appropriate for them. There isn't time for me today to be able to focus on other important initiatives and compensation, but we are seeing some movement in healthcare and in retirement. But the bottom line is there's plenty here for us to learn about so we get to the point where we can get effective compensation justice reforms in place everywhere. And we do have these new and exciting things that have been happening. They're so systems oriented. They are oriented towards not having a pilot or not having a program that just serves a small number of people, but to serving many, 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 so that we can look all around a state and be able to see basically our educators having what they need to be able to be effective contributors to their own families and to have that recognition that the work that is being done within the childcare community is so vital. So I was going to say a little bit about Head Start, but I want to turn things over to Jamilah so that we can talk a little bit about Illinois now. I do want to say, as I make pass the baton to her, it is such a privilege to me to talk about these serious, significant compensation justice efforts. While change, of course, does happen in increments, what I like best about these two approaches that I've described is that they have started with such significant and large increments of change. In this way, they are really changing the framework that we can all use to be able to talk about, think about, and most importantly, really work on our approach to compensation justice. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Harriet, for the introduction. I especially want to thank Valora for the invitation to join today's discussion regarding compensation justice. Compensation is certainly is top of mind for many due to the workforce crises that we are facing across the country, both pre and post pandemic. However, compensation injustice has been a contributing factor to the crises, resulting in loss of staff, program closings, families choosing to either not enter or leave the workforce. It's created competition between programs for staff. It's created market and industry competition, loss of eligibility for workforce participants due to compensation increases. And if we look at the average salary for the early childhood workforce in 2022 was $14 per hour. As a result, it resulted in earning less than 98% of all other occupations in the United States annually. So again, I just need to repeat that at the $14 per hour, this results in the workforce earning less than 98% of all other occupations in the United States annually. In addition, according to most data, the early childhood education degrees generally have one of the lowest earning potentials among college majors. So as I was reviewing the charts, I've been around long enough, as Valora was sharing the charts at the beginning of this webinar, I was definitely reminded of how long we have been championing this work, having this conversation, and also encourage as far as how far we have come in telling our story. Within Illinois, we have moved forward with various strategies and approaches. As Harriet mentioned, there's no one approach or no one strategy. And so we've been able to implement various approaches and strategies and approaches to support educator compensation. I will walk you through to use my time with you today. I'll walk you through several of those strategies. Our Accelerate uh, Illinois Child Care Center pilot program, our Strengthen and Grow Grant Child Care Grant Program, our Smart Start Transition Grant, our Smart Start Workforce Grant, and our Great Start Wage Supplement Program. The Illinois Accelerate Child Care Pilot Program was made possible by a grant that we received from the Preschool Development Grant Birth to Five. This was a new approach to compensation which was tested through our quality rating and improvement system to help early care and education programs staff move to higher quality levels and what we call our circles of quality. The Accelerate pilot program was designed to test a strategy of providing programs with resources to strengthen their program quality upfront, rather than to only provide additional resources to programs that had already reached the quality benchmarks. The pilot framework linked additional staffing requirements with additional state funding. For every staff position required by the pilot beyond licensing requirement, program administrators received a full rate that covered the entire wage for that individual. Participants in the Accelerate pilot reported the funding they received as intended, allowed them to pay higher wages, and implement a staffing pattern that allowed for reflective practice as well as continuous quality improvement work, which was central to the revised Accelerate Illinois framework that was being tested. Due to the incremental increases that were provided to staff, we realized both staff retention as well as increases in credential attainment. The next few strategies and approaches that I will share with you is actually part of a multi-year plan to increase funding for child care providers to raise wages as well as increase program quality. Our Strengthen and Grow child care grants were designed to both provide stabilizing relief for child care educators to offset the impact of the pandemic, as well as support increased compensation for child care staff. Over $980 million in federal relief funds were invested to support the recovery and sustainability of Illinois' early childhood education workforce. Program administrators were awarded grants, and a minimum of 50% of the funding had to be used to increase compensation or support benefits. Our next strategy as part of this multi-year plan is the Strengthen and Grow. As part of the Strengthen and Grow, it actually came out of the Strengthen and Grow child care grants at Smart Start Illinois, which was launched in 2023. The Smart Start transition grants were developed to provide a stable funding stream for licensed providers to help raise wages for licensed providers to support increased compensation and provide staff benefits, as well as to provide additional classroom resources. 75% of the grant funds must be spent on personnel, and expenses could be paid under what is called the enhanced personnel line. What can be included in this line item includes raises, bonuses, employee benefits, professional development, mental health consultation, as well as other items. And then the last grant program as part of this multi-year strategy is our Smart Start Workforce Grant. This grant is available for licensed child care programs, family child care programs, family child care, or family group child care. The goal is to assist group program administrators to raise wages for personnel. Funds must be spent only on staff wages, and programs must meet a wage floor for teachers and assistant teachers. The wage floor varies by region, type of program, as well as the role that the individual holds within the program. Eligible programs receive consistent funding in advance, and funds will cover the cost of higher wages as well as classroom operations. The competitive wages will help to attract more staff and support families' needs for affordable childcare. I will also note here that for each of the programs, there is a percentage child care assistant program funding requirement to access each of these grant programs. Our next strategy is our Great Start Wage Supplement Program, and START is the strategy to attract and retain teachers. This statewide program provides wage supplements to assistants, teachers, family child care providers, family group child care providers, and directors who work in licensed programs, have completed college coursework, and remain at their current place of employment based on their continued eligibility. Payments are made directly to the Great Start recipients. There is a Great Start Wage Supplement Scale, and this grant is used to supplement an individual's income. The program is a public-private partnership between the state as well as our philanthropic community. So those are just a few of the strategies that I wanted to share with you and the time that I have. But in closing, the compensation strategies, please know that they are part of a larger vision to develop a diverse, well-qualified early childhood workforce that is drawn from and reflects the communities in which they serve. A few of the lessons that we learned from our work that I wanted to note is that there are 4 components within our early education and care mixed delivery system that must complement each other in order to address compensation justice. They are program standards, funding, which includes compensation, coaching. Coaching supports consultation, professional development, as well as providing higher education pathways. Again, I want to thank you for, the opportunity to, just briefly share with you, some of the efforts, while varied, that we have been moving forward in Illinois to address compensation justice. So I want to thank you for this time. And at this time, I'd like to open it up for a group discussion, which will be facilitated by Valora. So thank you very much for the opportunity to join you. Valora?
Thank you so much. And Harriet, if you'll join us too, there's so much to learn, a lot of activity in the chat, and lots of questions. I want to remind people that if you'd like to directly ask Harriet or Jamilah a question or have a comment you want to share with them, at the end of this webinar, there will be a link that you can click that will put you in a conversation and dialogue directly with them. Thank you both for giving such an example of what dynamic work is happening in Illinois, and Harriet, your frame of how we are seeking to achieve compensation justice throughout the United States, and your 2 pathways that you mentioned. Lots to think about, lots of questions in the chat. There's a number of questions about the DC model, and I'm sure you all anticipated that. I want to remind people you will be getting a list of resources following this webinar, and one of those is a webinar that we did earlier, which focused specifically on the DC model. So some questions in the chat. People want to know if the DC model was based on professional development and experience, and whether or not it has to be advocated for the funding on a year-to-year basis. So those are factual questions. Harriet, I'll just toss to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. The DC model basically sets forth the idea that you're in a role. basically, and within the role, you get a certain amount of compensation, okay? And it is restricted, as I said, as a starting point to people working in classrooms, in family childcare homes, as well as in centers. I think the biggest question we've had has been, because I did allude to the fact that it had this fantastic startup and then there was a little blip in here. So I think Colin asked this question, how is this being financed? So the people in DC were very smart about that. And they actually saw it and were successful in getting some dedicated funding, significant dedicated funding, obviously, because this is a program for all. As I said, it's part of what I think is very powerful about this and very important and should be very inspiring to all of us. So they did go about basically understanding that they'd had a kind of a previous law that had said generally we need to be paying attention to our people who are providing childcare services, especially our infant toddler teachers in the childcare community. And their dedicated revenue is a wealth tax, actually. Okay, so that's something people talk about around the country. This is a place that actually enacted that in order to be able to help with this initiative. But as I think there are people from DC on this call, and someone helpfully said, perhaps more tactfully than I could have, basically, in this, that it's also a place like every place else. There are some other budget issues and things that arise. And so as they were moving further into implementation, some local disagreements and perspective taking arose that have meant that they've had to continue to elevate the program, all right, and stay on top of it. And so while there is sustainable funding, I just want to say for me, what's my lesson from this, and it's from all my years basically of working, as an appointed person for more than one governor, okay, and thinking about all of this stuff, is you can never rest on your laurels. I mean, and that barely matters what programming we have. I think we all know, we're all on this call together today, that we can have these good successes for our work in early childhood. And then we have to keep actually bragging about how great they are, making sure that we're sustaining the interest level and the prioritization for them. And so I think that the people from DC would be very clear about that. And again, they have a very long history in DC of not just this particular work, but work that came decades before this, where they look and they're like, let's have a big change, and they focus, organize themselves, fight. They don't win at the first time most times. They get us something and they keep the flag raised for that and then keep on adding. So those are other pieces I might take out of the experience in DC. It has been wonderful, and it's certainly something that I happen to be a very big advocate for, is actually paying a lot of attention to your financing. All right, and understanding that you both have to have fantastic, meaningful ideas that we're generating, and that you must keep on raising the budget advocacy, because you're always in the end competing with other also important things that the government needs to help to get done. Right. And so we can't ever make an assumption. So I really like this part of the DC part, that they had very specific. I didn't mention this in Vermont, and I hope it's okay, Valora, now going beyond the
Yes.
question, to share Vermont also, because they're running a systems-based initiative. They are really doing a lot, and they're meaning to scale and have much broader coverage. They enacted a payroll tax to be able to pay for this. Okay. And I will just go on to say that, interestingly enough, their governor, who is friendly, I think, to childcare, basically vetoed this tax, and the legislature had to override it because he'd said he wanted to do more, but didn't want to raise more revenue to do it. And people in community and others understood, if you were going to do something at this scale, many more children being able to have access, the community as a whole, basically being able to, the workforce being able to have improvements, real improvements in their wages, not 5 cents an hour kinds of improvements, then you were going to have to get more. So the Vermont initiative has also included a revenue component. And I did mention New Mexico. And of course, New Mexico, I think, is very well known around the country now for having had not one, but two major dedicated funding streams created, basically to help support their early childhood education and care work. And so, one of those is off of their oil and gas kinds of revenues, and the other is off of their land grant, where they had a constitutional amendment to do that. So all of these have really recognized, I think, that especially when we're talking about compensation, if we are going to make the kinds of systemic changes at the levels in which people, I know we have many providers on this call, so which the providers doing the work are paid what it is you should be paid, we have to address the revenue thing. When we don't address the revenue, it's how we got to the increments of $1,000 a year, $2,000 a year. Those, of course, are always meaningful, but they're not at the level to fundamentally change the shabby wages that we pay.
It doesn't change the system. Thank you so much for that. So many questions that have come up, and I just really want to highlight family child care and Head Start. I want to let everybody know that in your resources, we're going to send you a case study about DC, because we know that a lot of people are very interested in that, and you'll find this case study to be very informative. Can you just highlight a little bit about what's happening with compensation in Head Start and in family child care in Illinois, for example, some of the other states that you've been talking about, because these are two parts of our field that people are always very curious about.
Do you want me to start with Head Start, and then
Sure.
Jamilah, you want to talk about family child care, especially in Illinois? Okay. So what's going on with Head Start is really interesting. So very recently, the federal government issued new Head Start rules that are directly about compensation. Now, these new rules are going to take, I counted, 7 years, okay, to phase in, but they are going to require that Head Start teachers get paid the same as preschool teachers in public school settings, or 90% of kindergarten teacher salaries. Now, these will get adjusted based on responsibilities, qualifications, experience, and hours worked. These also will apply to other educational staff working in Head Start, because let's remember our Head Start model, comprehensive model, right? And so the required personnel, more required positions that are helping with the education and development of the children. So those are also going to be included in this. They also are going to be required as part of this rollout to have healthcare coverage, paid leave, and offer access to short-term, free or minimal cost behavioral health services. That's pretty fantastic. Now, does this apply to every single Head Start program? The answer to that is actually no. Head Start programs that are serving 200 or fewer children are actually excluded, but they are expected to establish and update their own pay scale or structure to promote a competitive wage for their staff and to make measurable improvements in wages and improvements in staff benefits over time. So it's a little bit of a two-tiered system within Head Start. The bigger programs are absolutely going to be on the hook, basically for more vastly improved compensation, right? To really get people. And again, Head Start generally is better than childcare, as we all know. But does that make it good enough? The answer is no. Okay, so this is going to help in terms of that. And then the smaller programs are going to have work of their own to do, but they won't be held to that same strict standard that has been articulated for the larger programs. So that's a little bit of overview. This has been in play now for a bit of time in terms of Head Start, but the new rules were issued relatively recently. Yeah, and as I said, we can expect they're going to take, Head Start. The last thing actually I was going to mention is Head Start was a demonstration of something people used to say about compensation from our history in terms of what we did. And Head Start, as many of you may know, had a big push to actually improve the qualifications of the staff, right? Have many more people with BAs, higher qualifications. And the view often in the field had been, if we can just demonstrate to people that we have professional credentialing, then the pay will come. All right. And Head Start kind of had some of that theory. They now have said that is important that we've done all that, but we have more to do on the pay. And we
Yeah.
have to get the pay thing to be very explicit. So I just want to have a reminder to people. I think overall, our thinking that we need to credential everyone, and if we can successfully credential everyone, we will just get what people should get. People now understand, no, we have to have very explicit financed things because our society is not prepared just to recognize credentialing. And now, of course, there's, even additional debates and conversations about what do we mean by that credentialing.
We can also provide people with information about this in our follow-up materials. And people are in the chat are asking about the timeline, Harriet. It's over multiple years. Was it 5 to 7 years?
The Head Start thing
Yes.
is 7 years till full implementation. I counted from the date of issuance. So, or from this year, 2024, 7 years in total that it will take for it to be implemented.
Thank you.
So,
Jamilah, I wonder
yeah.
if you could share with us a little bit about compensation related to family childcare. Family childcare always needs a special opportunity to be uplifted so that people understand that we're not just talking about any particular sector, center-based care, Head Start, and so forth. So can you just tell us a little bit about family childcare?
Well, when we think about, again, additional approach, or, if you want to think about a strategy, we have to talk about unions. We can't have this conversation without addressing the role of unions. And certainly family childcare within Illinois and other states have benefited from union representation. In Illinois, that would be SEIU that has represented the unions. I am, I was born into a family of unions, so I always have to start with my acknowledgement, as they always say, a Teamster baby, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. I've never, I don't even know, as far as my life, my entire life, I don't know what that feels like not to be part of a union. And so our family child care community has certainly benefited as far as we look at the history of unions. They were formed to, address better living conditions. They were addressed to address compensation as well as benefits. And so definitely our family child care. I want to take this opportunity to lift up an initiative that is taking place in New Jersey, the New Jersey Communities United, the LIFT Fund. Is first of its kind collaboration between philanthropy and labor with the support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And so this is an initiative that we should definitely watch as it supports a new form of organizing to see again I think Harriet said the progress, the breakthroughs. I want to make sure I quote her correctly. The breakthroughs that we're making, and so we definitely need to watch. New Jersey as well as their creating this model of community organizing and unions, and so we just need to keep this at the forefront.
Mhm. Any final comments this is an opportunity for us to introduce some of the initiatives that are happening in compensation justice. This is an area that requires a really deep dive if you want to know more about it, and which is why we'll be providing you with additional resources. So I'm going to ask you, Harriet, if you have any final words before we go into the opportunity for people to meet you online, and Jamilah, the same thing. And everyone can be looking at the link, which will be open at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. Last word, Harriet.
Okay, well, I think here are my last words because I feel like we have examples now of compensation reform work that is the most meaningful we have had in the entire time that I've been involved in work in early childhood. And I am very excited about that. And I understand because I saw some of the comments. We have people working in places where this conversation seems very far away still. It's not like there and present in your home communities. but I want to share in the bigger way that we not only have these powerful examples of Illinois, the District of Columbia, Vermont, New Mexico that we've mentioned today, but they're not the same approach. They're very systems oriented, but they're not the same. Okay. They have involved people looking within community, looking in their political context, basically, and saying, we can solve these issues. We can do more. We need to really focus on this, but we're going to have to do this in a way that we can get through within the context of our community and in the way things happen in this community. I find that very powerful, inspiring. You know, I am not one, I am one who does understand there are usually many different pathways to get to solve the problems that we have identified. And we often get caught up with saying there's only one way. We have to do it this way. And I can't do that where I live. So it will never happen. So I think my concluding piece here for people thinking about this is to continue to learn from the two approaches we've seen that are scaling basically at this point, but also to remember those approaches grew out of the persistence and the creativity basically of the people in those communities. And so to some degree, you may listen to both of these approaches and say, that is never going to happen in my place either. That's okay, because then you sit with like-minded people to really pursue and to focus on things that you can dream and that you can make come true in the context of your community. So that's really my closing. I think that we have more exciting to think about and more exciting to share. And while the politics of some of these places perhaps are more like than they are different, the reality is the places we've talked about today, they are geographically diverse, right? They do not have all the same types of populations in them. Those are selling points as you're beginning to say, hey, people can take this work on in these places. We can take it on in our home states too. So those are my concluding thoughts.
My without repeating what Harriet has stated, my concluding thoughts is I just want, as I again think about how we open this webinar, I just want everyone to continue to be encouraged. I think for the first time, and especially during and after the pandemic, that because I date back to those conversations, that we have made a lot of progress, and so we need to continue to move forward and continue to make progress. We say it might be small, but it's significant. And I think for the first time, when we talked about essential workers and the support, I think for the first time, the workforce was seen. And I think, as Harriet has noted, and I want to, restate that for the first time that individuals are seeing and having conversations in places and in different ways, as a result. I think the pandemic was really instrumental in doing that. And so, let's just stay the course. I also want to share, Valora, that we also need to think about other partners that we need to have in this conversation. We really didn't have a chance to talk about our higher education partners, the role of our philanthropic community. And so I think there's a role, there's definitely a role, I know there is, to engage them in this discussion as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I am definitely inspired and encouraged. And as we think about being persistent and being creativity, we're thrilled to announce to you that we're going to continue our conversation about how you show up with courage. And we're going to be doing the next 2 months in partnership with the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And in October, we are going to have a very nonpartisan conversation about how we can vote our values. In October, please join us with Helen Blank and Niall Blass and Michelle Kay to talk about how we vote our values. This is not going to be about candidates. It's going to be about voting our values. And so join us next month as we work in partnership with NAEYC to talk about voting our values. We'll also be working in partnership with NAYC in November, where we'll be talking about the policy agenda that we need to have for the coming year. So join us with NAYC in October and November to talk about these issues. Thank you for learning with the CAYL Institute today. We hope you'll click the link and join us to have a dialogue with our panelists today. Thank you so much for being a part of our CAYL community, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Good night.